Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with relationship and sex therapist Jodie Shea. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist in private practice based in Orange County, California. She owns Pillow Talk Therapy, which offers virtual therapy to individuals or romantic partners struggling with the emotional and physical aspects of their relationship. Love and sex are what she talks about all day, and she loves it. She went into the therapy field knowing she wanted to specialize in all things romantic relationships. It's a reality. We get into it. Enjoy this interview.
Well, hey, Jodie, thank you for taking a minute out. And before we hop into your life, you know, the last 3 years we've gone through quite a thing with the pandemic, and it's worked on all of us in its own unique way. So I'm curious, how did you survive that time period, and how has it changed the way that you live your life now that we're coming out of it and things are opening up?
Well, that's a big question. I mean, actually, from a professional standpoint, COVID actually worked out really well for me because I am not from the area I live in now in California. I'm from the East Coast, actually. And so I was never really tied to a spot, and I wasn't really big on having a physical office. And so I was already keen on, doing the online thing. And so that actually just kind of made it more possible. So that part was great for me. However, right a few months into COVID, got thrown into a divorce. And so that was the part that was the hardest because, those are the times that you really need, social support. And everybody else has so many of their own things going on from COVID that it was really hard. And I was kind of, we had moved and I was in this place that's like a less developed area out here that's kind of more up and coming. So it was just a lot of social isolation. And so I would try to connect with people as best I could. I would go out and do walks just to kind of enjoy the property. We had, out here HOAs are a huge thing. So walking around the little lake thing that we had and stuff like that. But it was definitely a difficult time. And, so I definitely had to kind of break some relationships with people that I really found weren't able to be there for me because I didn't have the capacity for it. And then I just really was focusing on me and what I needed and moved to a different place and did all these things to just really kind of get back into my hobbies. And I definitely am kind of coming out the other side of that now.
So to get to the essence of what you do, let's say I put you in front of a bunch of third graders at a career day, and one of the kids looks up at you and says, "What do you do for a living?" How would you answer them?
For third graders, I'd probably say that I help people to communicate with each other and show love. I think that's really important for kids, too, to know how to give and accept love. And then I also help people to feel good about their bodies and things that their bodies naturally do.
When you were in the third grade, what did you want to be when you grew up? What was your dream?
I'm trying to remember back then, but I definitely came from not having a lot of education about different career paths. I did not know what a therapist was. And so I was very much on you have to be a teacher, doctor, lawyer. And so I actually ended up starting college to be a pharmacist and, just kind of showed I was just going the path that was laid out for me. But I realized quickly that I did not want to do that. So I would imagine I was somewhere in that realm of maybe like a doctor or teacher or something like that.
How did this line of work come about? How did you get to this point where this has been your passion?
I think like with a lot of people, I just started to really notice some of like the weird dynamics that would happen in a family. Just notice, you kind of like see some awkward moments with your parents or something when you're living together. And it's like, you'd hear noises or you'd see bodies and you're like, no one really explained to you how to process that. You just kind of had to figure things out for yourself. And so I was definitely aware of that. And then when I started kind of dating, I definitely started noticing like, wait, people will say they want one thing and then do the exact opposite of that thing. And I found that very confusing. So actually, after I finished undergrad, I kind of traveled in Korea for a while and was just living there just to enjoy the time and figure out me. And I was putting a lot of effort into dating, and one of my friends reflected that back for me. It was like, wow, you put a lot of effort into that, spend a lot of time. And I was like, yeah, because it really fulfills me, and I just also find it fascinating. I could talk about it all day. And I was like, wait a second, is there a way for me to talk about that all day? And here we are.
So the thing that I find fascinating about what you do is that at the end of the day, human beings are not taught. Most of us have no idea how relationships or the sexual functionality of humans work. We have to just kind of get thrown into it and if we are explained how it works, it's probably in school in an environment that's already uncomfortable because everybody around's getting weird. So my question to you is that how did we get to this point as a modern industrialized society where one of the most important things that's in every book, movie, song, anything that we consume is all about either sexualizing something or having a relationship, and we have no idea what the hell we're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that explains why we get drawn to music and movies and things so much, because they allow us to express or feel validated in things that we can't do with other people. Right, I think about this with movies, right? What makes those romantic movies like so relatable or fulfilling for people is that you're actually able to see both sides, right? Whereas if you're going through a breakup now, you don't really know how that other person's feeling unless they're reaching out to you all the time or you actively see them doing their drunken stupor of like, I'm so heartbroken, I can't even control myself. But most of the time you're kind of left in this unknown, right? And our mind is not a very friendly environment. It tends to be quite hostile, whereas if we're left to just have our mind fill in the blanks of these things, it's not going to be in a very like positive light towards us. Something's wrong with me. Yeah, that person might be a jerk, but it's a little more complicated than that. And especially in like the sexual world, and I think that that's a topic that's coming up so much lately with some of these new laws that are kind of being proposed in our kind of countries, like in an uproar right now, is a lot of our sex education is very male dominated, right? A lot of the stuff that we are now kind of redoing was developed by men, and it was very much if you don't have the same desire, or your drive or whatever doesn't look the same as a male, then there's something wrong with you. What's that? And that's where a lot of like the words frigid, kind of things like that kind of came from. And so we're kind of fighting against that. And even things like people in the LGBT community, we're kind of questioning, okay, were they always like that? Or, I'll hear people say, oh, well, how come that's coming out now? It's like, well, actually, it might have probably always been there. Some people it was potentially suppressed, right, because they were told it wasn't okay. And so they kind of were like, well, that must not be what's really going on with me, right? Or they did accept it and did it in secret and it wasn't safe to share that. So we're kind of seeing that. That's part of the reason that boom is happening now. Is like, you'd be surprised what happens when you give people permission, right? We talk about that a lot in our training of it's so important to give people permission. And I saw it even when I transitioned. A few years ago, I was only advertising the couples therapy part. And then as soon as I added the sex therapy part, it went from, ooh, that's an awkward question when I ask about, their frequency or their sex life, to this is what we're coming in for right up front. And so it's just so great to kind of see some of that, but it makes sense because, the world's still not really safe for some of these topics. And also for, we talk about attachment and why, how we give and receive love. Majority of us do not come from awesome examples. It's not necessarily our caregiver's fault or parents or whatever you want to call them. However, that doesn't mean that they didn't pass something on if they didn't fix it themselves.
That makes total sense. And I think, too, probably a part of, and I have some teenagers at home and get engaged in some of these talks about where we're at. And we've advanced quite a bit since I was a kid. And I think part of it is this Me Too culture where I think there is this acceptance of, like you had said, kind of this male-dominated way of teaching things that just isn't okay because there's things that just don't take everything holistically into consideration. So I guess my question leading into that is that do you think now in this modern era of 2023, as much as we can take a step back, we're actually taking more steps forward in that realm of relationships and talking about what makes sense for each of us individually?
Yes, I definitely think we are taking those steps forward. I think it's never a nice, easygoing process because part of like what happens with some of these, like you're saying, Me Too movements or of these other things that are happening is that people have been kind of asking nicely for so long that what happens is when people have been kind of suppressing for something for so long, it kind of shoots up. I give people the example of like a beach ball, right? It's like we're kind of putting so much effort to hold that beach ball underwater, and we're just getting completely exhausted. And when we finally let that go, or even if it wasn't something we chose to do, we just lose our grip, or, we have a low moment, and that beach ball just, kind of ejects out of the water. That's kind of what we're seeing with some of these things, right? Even though, time and time again, we're like, people are, shaming people is not really the best motivator for getting people to change or understand a concept or whatever, but it's what we're going to because it's a protective stance, right? I see that a lot in relationships. People will want to be vulnerable, but because they don't feel safe to do so, they'll do it in kind of like this shroud of defensiveness, or they'll say something that kind of has a little bit of a sting to it, or, they'll present in a very kind of, puffed up manner. And it's a way to protect themselves, but they end up kind of shooting themselves in the foot too, because that person is then going to have their wall up and not want to listen. So you're seeing that with some of these things where it's like we're trying to give a voice to things that have maybe been happening for a long time. And then, but because there's that desperation, right? Or, there's a lot of hurt feelings behind a lot of it. And when people push back, right, it just doesn't end up kind of working out that well. It's still providing movement, but it's also kind of causing some polarizations and things as well. When people feel that shame, their walls are going to come up, right? Or they feel challenged.
For sure. So who's been a big motivation for you, a big kind of role model in your life?
What's funny is this question kind of came up the other day at an event I had gone to, and I gave kind of two answers. One is just, people who are kind of a couple steps ahead of me, who are kind of like what I'm looking to go for. And that doesn't necessarily always mean people that are famous, or it could just be people that have group practice. They have some business knowledge, or they're kind of, I'm also a person that struggles sometimes to get things done. And so people that are just doers, and I'll be like, oh, I wish I could be like that. That was one part of it. There's also a woman named Emily Nagoski who's really awesome right now, and I think she's a good role model in the sex therapy field for sure. And the other answer I gave, which is a little bit different than other people, was actually a part of myself, because I've always been aware of, and this is actually a type of therapy that I do, which is really interesting. I've always been aware of different parts of myself that were present. I've always felt like an extrovert, but I felt kind of trapped by this shroud of shyness that I couldn't be that person. I'm like inside of one, like, hey guys, how are you doing? Nice to meet you. And then there was like, no, you can't say that. Shh. Like, don't make waves, don't do these things. And when I finally started kind of leaning into that part of myself that wanted to be who I was, that's when things really started happening. Surprisingly, I used to be the quietest, one of the quietest kids in my grade. And my family doesn't even recognize me now because I finally did those things. I made the move. I did whatever I had to do because that's what I wanted. It doesn't mean I wasn't scared, but I did it anyway. And so giving that voice to that part of myself was huge. I didn't need someone else's permission. I just needed to listen to me.
So if you could meet anybody alive on the planet right now and spend some time with them, who would it be? Who would you love to meet?
Oh, that's a really hard one. I honestly, this might be just a girl thing, but I think we all have those. But to be honest, I was always really fascinated by, like I said, I was kind of into Korean culture. There's a guy who's kind of like wears many hats, but he was one of the rappers in this Korean band named Big Bang. And he's about the same age as me. And I just really find him so fascinating. He's kind of really come into his own and went from, I'm kind of doing what's acceptable, to then really created his own identity, kind of made his own path. I feel bad also for him because he's expressed kind of going through some depression things. And in Korea, they're still very strict about any kind of substance use. He got in a lot of trouble for, smoking marijuana. And I just think it would be so fascinating. I just find him such an interesting, unique person.
Let's say you have a dream tonight and you run into the younger version of yourself, like, you know, in your 20s, early 20s, and you could give that version of you a piece of advice based on what you've lived through and the things that you've overcome, the wisdom you've gained, what would you tell your young version?
I would say, don't be in your head as much. Things are not as they seem. People do like you. You can do things. You'll be successful. Don't hold back. And I'd probably also, you know, maybe give myself a warning of some people that I've met that maybe to avoid, because I don't always believe that you have to go through some of those experiences to grow, and to really hold my boundaries, because that's really what got me in some of those situations where I felt like I had to do everything, or I felt like, oh, well, this is as good as I'm going to get, or, you know, I deserve that type of treatment. And, you know, to really kind of set my boundary, because that's what I've kind of been doing recently, and it's been working out pretty well. Not always, you know, sometimes it's a lonely road, but, you know, in the end, it ends up working out really well.
So of all of the things that you've accomplished in your life up to this point, what are you the proudest of?
I would say it was moving and starting a business. Those are kind of related, kind of separate, but I think definitely moving out of my comfort zone, realizing I didn't want to be where I was hard to leave family. You know, it wasn't an easy path, but just being able to be like, that's not me. It doesn't fit me. I'm not going to force myself into this mold that just, I don't feel fulfilled here. And then, you know, the starting my own business is kind of like in the same vein.
What has been the best client success story that you've been a part of, that you've helped happen?
Oh, few. I think that's what's hard. Therapy in general is quite a difficult field, because you get a lot of people that don't really stick with the process. And so that can actually be very disheartening if you get a lot of people that don't stick with it. And then, you know, you're always like, oh, but we could have got there, or, oh, you decided you were good enough. And I would say, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but it's definitely those people where, you know, they're really getting it. Or actually, I just had one that kind of came into mind where, you know, they came to see me early enough where you'll see that a lot. People end up coming to me as a last resort, and then so much kind of damage has been done over the years that it's really hard for them to get to a good place. And so these people that I'm thinking of came to me when, you know, noticing there was an issue. They were already kind of informed, which was great. And they really kind of actually like just leaned into the process. They were able to talk about things. They were able to connect with things. They were able to, there was one time I said something wrong, you know, just because I got caught up in wanting to make them feel better. And, you know, they kind of challenged me on that, and we were able to repair it, which, you know, most people will be like, oh, in today's day and age, oh, something bad happened, I'm going to run away, I'm going to block that person, I'm not going to talk to them again, I'm going to talk behind their back. And of course, that's definitely a risk, you know, in my line of work too, but that's part of this process, is being able to see that there are people that are going to apologize, they're going to be able to fix it and do those things. And I just really saw that play out with them and how much they grew. And they didn't even need to be with me for a long time, because they were doing the things. They didn't have to work through all those blocks because they handled it early enough.
So everyone out there sees you in a different light, your family, your friends, your clients, colleagues, but ultimately you're the one that's in control. You live your life. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
That is a very good point. I struggle with that a lot, especially being a professional that's pretty, you know, like out there in the community where I live, and going back home and having that basically mean nothing. So to me, I see myself as an extroverted person that struggles with shyness. I don't need a lot of individual time. I've accepted that I just love TV, and there's nothing wrong with that. And even at my, you know, even when I'm struggling with motivation and things, that I still get stuff done. I think about that all the time, of like, if I could be, you know, getting that motivation going, where can I be right now? But I'm like, man, I'm barely doing it, and I'm doing okay. So a person that's empathetic kind of comes with that, and understanding. I can be a little shamey internally, and, you know, sometimes that comes out outwardly as well when I, feel insecure. But I'm just definitely not a perfect person. And I love learning and, gaining more knowledge to help people, help myself. I love being a mentor. And I think I'm just a nice person. I try to be mindful, but I get in my own way sometimes. And that's okay. I'm working on it.
I like that answer. It's a great answer. It sounds like you got a great grasp on it. So if anyone out there wants to learn more about you, hire you, anything revolving around your world, where can they find you?
Yeah, so my website is pillowtalktherapy.com. And on there, I'm not the best at kind of doing a lot of things on there, but I put a lot of effort into like my content and just really trying to speak to people, having different pages, things like that. I'm also on Instagram. It's the same, Pillow Talk Therapy. And I try to kind of provide some good content on there as well that fit for people. And that's definitely something I'm trying to work on a little bit more now, because I have so many ideas, but like I was just saying, it's getting out of my own way and being able to figure out what that would look like so that I can share that with people.
Wonderful. Hey, Jodie, thank you for being so open and forthright about your story and about therapy and how all of this works. I really appreciate your time today. Best of luck with everything.
Yeah, thanks so much, Joe.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, relationships, spirituality, music, and more from around the globe. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. You can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.